Isaiah Colton, and we are live throughout multiple business pages and also in our private Facebook group, Lead Gen and Conversion Mastery. I'm really excited to have my business partner, Brian, who heads off the coaching for Grow CEO Coaching and also has his own one-on-one coaching program. Brian, if you don't know who Brian is, he has been in the real estate business for over 20 years, has a very, very successful independent brokerage that does, on average, over 500 transactions every year, has an awesome team. And Brian and I are going to start going live pretty consistently every Wednesday at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time, if you want to save that in your calendar. And our goal is to help, our mission with this live stream is to help you with all things lead generation and lead conversion. I think what you're going to find this different than a lot of other live streams that you turn into is the specific knowledge base on not only how to do lead generation, lead conversion, but how to leverage AI technology, but also how to scale a team. So Brian has extensive experience in scaling teams and has actually worked with some of the biggest names in the industry when it comes to building teams, building brokerages, and between him and I's experience, there is no doubt we are going to bring the goods. So make sure you tune in 12 o'clock 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. We're going to stay pretty consistent every Wednesday. And today's topic, we are going to be talking about common mistakes that team leaders make when they're generating and managing leads. Brian, I know I personally have went through this pain where I went out and bought a whole bunch of leads and did all this work to, spend all the time, money, and energy of, on leads and handing them out to my team. And there's a lot of pain points in that process. So I'd like to talk about, just have an open dialogue, talk about some of the common mistakes that, top performers and team leaders specifically in this conversation make when it comes to managing their lead process.
Yeah, and let me start with the simplest idea, Isaiah. It's the top line versus the bottom line. To me, that is the very first mistake that team leaders make. They'll look at a lead source and they'll say, hey, we'll just call it lead source X. I'm not sure we're here promoting a specific lead source today. So we'll call it lead source X. Maybe they have the most closings on lead source X. That's the lead source where they look at it and go, man, I had, let's just take 100 closings and 40 of them were for lead source X. Well, that's great. The problem is, did you make any money? Because, yeah, you had more closings and there's a value in a closing in a lifetime client, but I'm talking short term when you look at it. So the very first thing I think people need to do is just start taking a look at X number of dollars I spend, X number of dollars I get in return. And, there are free lead sources, your Sphere, your past clients, they can be hypothetically free, although I'm sure at one point we'll talk about this. Honestly, putting some money, energy, and marketing into your past clients and Sphere is actually a much more effective way to get money there. But yeah, for me, the very first thing I want to look at is, am I actually making money with my closing? Because I don't know about you, but I get people call me all the time, tell me about great new lead source. And the very first thing that they say is, this is what you need to do to break even. Well, the last thing I'm interested in doing is breaking even. I can drink beer on my couch and break even. That's not hard.
Yeah, that sounds like a better value proposition to me.
The next time somebody calls you and talks about how to break even with their lead source, there's your line. I can break even drinking beer on my couch. So, but yeah, that's the first place for me is, am I actually making money on my lead source? Yeah. Now, and I also want to say it's a more long-term thing. It's not, I had this lead source for a week and a half, I'm not making money yet, but on a 6-month snapshot, if you will, am I making money?
Yeah. Well, I think there's a lot to unpack within this particular comment that you made. So I'm just going to ask you some questions on this. So what frequency do you recommend? How long does somebody go to determine whether the lead source makes sense to continue with or not? And as far as tracking, and what ROI should they be working towards? And I know that depends on whether you're like a top agent or a team leader. So, let's just unpack that a little bit.
Yeah, I like an ROI of a minimum of 3. And actually, that's not even an ROI. So you know how to calculate ROI, but let's let's keep it even a little bit simpler, because it actually makes sense to keep it simpler. For every dollar I spend, at a minimum, I want to get 3. That's not technically ROI, but it's an easy way to figure out what money I'm spending. Now, I'm going to take a step back and answer your other question. The question is not as simple as we do. So I get this question all the time. How many leads should I give somebody? I don't know. Are you giving them top of funnel leads, bottom of funnel leads, middle of funnel leads? Yes. So that's not a question that you can answer directly without more information. And it's the same for tracking my lead source. So if you have a lead source that's bottom of funnel, you can look at it in 90 days. If you have a lead source that's top of funnel, you better at a minimum look at it 6 months, realistically a year. So what's a top of funnel lead source in my mind? Mailing postcards, very effective way to do. Pick a farm that. But if you don't get a closing the first month and you give up, you've literally wasted all your money. So, one of the things people need to do is when they go and look at a lead source is, how much money have I set aside? Because I'm not going to be instantly profitable. We say this all the time. Whatever I'm doing today in real estate, I get paid for 90 days from now. Well, if I get a brand new lead source today and it's a top of funnel lead source, well, I better give that a minimum of 6 months to start figuring out if I get a return. And also we can start looking at lagging indicators and leading indicators. So for example, let's say that we're doing a postcard thing. Obviously, the lagging indicator that we want is a closing. I mean, we all know that. That's what we're trying to do. But what are the leading indicators? In other words, if I send out 100 postcards, how many phone calls do I get? How many emails do I get? How many text messages how many responses am I getting from that person? So if I send out 100 and I get 0 and I do that for 6 months in a row, well, that's obviously not very effective. So yeah, you have to look at leading and lagging indicators when you're calculating that.
Yeah, I love it. I love that. And I love that, I love that you're pointing out. So I think one of the biggest problems when it comes to lead generation in our industry is the knowledge and understanding of the difference between a top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel type of lead. And so let's drill down into that a little bit more. So maybe our audience is not familiar with how to figure out, generally speaking, like what the expectation for a closing cycle conversion rate should be on the different type of leads. So sure. If you would, why don't you break that down for us? There's a lot to unpack there too.
Yeah, I'll start with the lead source that everybody talks about, and in my opinion, most people don't understand. And that would be a social media generated lead. And nine out of 10 of those are Facebook. I know we get some Instagram and some other things. And and by the way, I'm not talking about an organically created Facebook lead. Those are free. Yeah, those are free. You can get as many of those as you want. The ROI is through the roof on free leads. But I'm talking about, I ran an ad. I targeted a group of people. So on Facebook, a couple of years ago, a friend of mine actually did a study. And now I want to say this is a high producing team doing more transactions than my team. ISAs, so we've got inside salespeople, so we know the phone calls are being made. It's not one of those things like, if you buy a lead and never call it, then that's a whole different discussion.
What do you mean the lead didn't convert itself? What are you talking about, Brian? Like, I actually have to follow up with a lead? Really? Like,
I suppose you followed up on a regular basis. But here's what they found about Facebook leads. It was over 500 days on the average for a Facebook lead to convert. So those of you who are online and you see these advertisements, we can get you leads for $2 or $3. You absolutely can. And by the way, there's a positive ROI on that. However, the amount of follow-up that you have to do for a Facebook lead, and understand the logic of a Facebook lead. They didn't log on to Facebook because they wanted to buy a house or sell a house. They logged on to Facebook because of politics, religion, cat pictures, whatever reason people go to Facebook. We all go for different reasons. That's a whole other webinar. But ultimately, you have to understand they're there. They saw a pretty picture, guys. So, is there somebody who happened to be looking at real estate anyway, and they also saw a pretty picture? Absolutely. So here's my point. On a 12-month cycle on something like Facebook, 1% is fabulous. And you can do 1% if you have long-term drip set up. In other words, if you're going to make sure that after you hit that person pretty hard on the front end, let's say the first I like 15 days. That's me. We hit them pretty hard on the front end. Then after that, you've got to put them on long-term drips, and there's lots of stuff. And, we'll probably spend an entire webinar talking about some of the AI that can help us with this now. And, you and I have talked about this. One of my favorite things about AI is it doesn't get tired. It doesn't take a day off. It doesn't get sick. It doesn't have kids. And I love my kids. Don't get me wrong, but kids will screw up a real estate transaction because I'm too busy hanging out with my family and my friends. And I'm all for that. But I love that. And we'll go into that AI. And the more we use AI for things like that, in my opinion, that is where the power of it is. It's not in trying to have that front end conversation only, but having that consistent follow up that human beings, you've been in the industry not quite as long as I have, but when I got in the industry, you got 10 leads a month. That was a great month. It wasn't hard to follow up with 10 people, it was easier. Now they were more bottom of the funnel and, that kind of thing.
Yeah.
So Facebook, I'm thinking 1%. And honestly, if you sit down to the math, even as little as 0.5%, it will give you a positive return on investment with Facebook. I'll be honest, we don't even mess with it anymore.
Right.
It's too competitive out there for me. So whereas the majority of our marketing money getting spent, it's pay-per-click. And, the beauty of pay-per-click is there's actually intent. And again, I like to look at this from the intent of the person. So again, scrolling through, looking at cat pics, pretty picture of a house, not a lot of intent.
Sure.
I go to Google and I go home for sale in Rochester, New York. There's a lot of intent there. I don't know what the intent is, but at a minimum, you intended to look at houses. And so that person has a significantly higher intent. And so honestly, over a 180-day period, you should be able to, with that consistent follow-up, get a 3% conversion rate. And so to me, pay-per-click is more middle of the funnel. It's top to middle of the funnel for that goods. And I'm just going to talk online leads. We can talk other stuff. And then you've got portal leads. Those are the next. I will tell you that my team, and here comes back to the original point that we started this with. My team, according to Zillow, I'll just use the Z word, was converting leads with Zillow at 14%, which like a really good number, right?
Yeah.
Here's the reality, though. We weren't making money. And that's one of the things that's the whole thing is, hey, this is our number one closing source. Why are we going broke making money? And and that's really what it came down to. I had a fun discussion with my Zillow rep who explained to me that it was in my best interest to continue to buy leads when I wasn't making money. I wasn't smart enough to agree with that, so I chose to no longer do that. But I couldn't figure out how he was right. I'm sure he was, but I couldn't.
You mean you didn't like working for Zillow? What's wrong with you?
By the way, I'm not a Zillow hater.
That's right.
Not a Zillow hater, but I was with them from 2011 to 2023. Yeah. Right. So, I spent some time with them. I wasn't a Zillow hater like a lot of people are. But, again, I look at that 14% conversion rate. You were very impressed when I said that. But the problem is, again, I don't give a rip about that. What I care about is how much money went into my bank account that I can reinvest in my team so that we can, help more people. And if the answer is none, then that's not a good program because I'm just basically paying the agent, which has to happen. And then you got to pay staff. And the math doesn't always work.
Yeah. And I think this is what's so important, because for a lot of top performers, team leaders, a big chunk of their expense is going to be lead generation, right? Mm-hmm. What percentage do you see the average team spends on marketing and lead generation in general? I know it varies depending on their business model, but
it does.
Let's talk about any best practices that around there, and then I got a couple other follow-up questions about managing this process to make sure that the ROI is actually happening. So,
yeah, no, great idea. I see a number that really just keep reoccurring for me is 30%. So That's a number you see over and over again. Some teams spend a little bit more. And at the end of the day, all that really does is change your risk reward and changes your value prop. Because the more money I spend on marketing as a team leader, the more I can advertise to agents, hey, I've got more leads. I've got this type of leads. I've got a higher quality lead, whatever that is. There's a balance there between getting that ROI and then recruiting, because, we haven't gone down this road, but the number one lever for any team leader is not most people think it's getting my current agents to do significantly better. I think the number one lever is bringing in more people who want that, and because it does a lot of things there. But and by the way, I'm an and guy, so what I mean by that is, and I want my agents to get better, but ultimately the ability to do that's one of the reasons I love pay-per-click as well. So if you're buying Zillow leads, and I'm not suggesting you should or shouldn't, but most markets are sold out. So I've got 100 Zillow leads a month. If I add 5 agents to my team, now what I've got is I've watered down all of my now everybody gets less leads. But when I do pay-per-click, I literally go out, write a slightly bigger check, and bring in the quantity of leads to compensate for the number of agents that I did. Now, there's a ceiling to all of this, but at the end of the day, very few team leaders approach that ceiling.
Yeah, that's a good point. Yeah, and I think the other thing that I think a lot about too is there's a lot of different ways to break up that 30%. But I think the key is what I found when I'm working with teams, or one of the big mistakes I see with teams, is they're not even really tracking a percentage, like staying with a percentage, and they get all out of whack, and next thing you know, they're spending 40-50% or just too much within their budget, and they're wondering why they're purging money. And I just think whatever percentage you're committed to, my recommendation is make sure it fits within the overall budget. And then don't say to yourself, I need to spend more to make this work. That's usually not the problem, is spending more. It's then whatever percentage you choose to work with, it's about maximizing the output, and the result of whatever you're spending. And I think that's a big a lesson that a lot of young team leaders learn the hard way. Is they're like, oh, okay, I got this lead gen source, and okay, I'm going to spend money on this one, then this one, and they're not really focused on optimizing or really installing lead conversion best practices, and so they go broke. So let's maybe talk about some of that from a team leader perspective on how they manage their how they manage that lead conversion process.
Yeah, so I'm going to take one step back and then answer that question. The first step is, one of the things you should look at is cost per agent. It's not a stat I hear much about. I started calculating a couple of years ago. So, and here's why. Because I was a nerd in college. I was an ops research major for a while, which basically, for those of you who don't know what that means, I didn't. When I got into it, was basically the idea is creating mins and maxes. In other words, how do I get the minimum this or the maximum this? It's what ops research is all about, is trying to figure out how to minimize and maximize equations inside of a business or other model. So what am I saying by that? Well, if I'm spending $2,000 per agent, that's different than I'm spending $5,000 an agent. So you need to take a look at that and see, hey, am I spending too much per person? By the way, let's just take $2,000 per agent as a cost to run a team. That means for you to be profitable, it starts at $2,000. How much is that? Or is it, $4,000? Is it $8,000? How much are you looking to profit off of each person? That's it. Here's another thing people don't take into account. When you're running a team, you have staff, right? You have staff. So am I maximizing my staff? So what I mean by that, I got a transaction coordinator. An average really good transaction coordinator can handle between 40 and 50 transactions a month. And if you're doing 40 transactions a month and have 3 transaction coordinators, then you're not maximizing that. You need to bring in more transactions. So the min-max concept is really important. And oftentimes I think people, they start looking, I need to spend more money here, more money here. No, you need to bring in more people so that you're maximizing your staff, because staff is a fixed cost. So it is in my world anyway. I pay my transaction coordinators X number of dollars a month, whether they close 1 transaction or 100 in that month. So that is a fixed cost. I can increase my profit by maintaining the same fixed cost and then increasing the amount of income I have, hence bringing in more agents for that. So I think that's an important part to look at too, is where's my minimum and max, and where am I doing that? And am I spending too much money, too little money on each agent as they come in? And by the way, it's one of the things I tell people. Guys, I spend X number of dollars a month for you to be on my team. I let people know that so they know that if they choose not to participate, maybe it didn't hurt their bottom line, but it did hurt mine. And we're a team, we're partners in this thing. And if we're going to be partners, you need to do your part. I'm going to do mine. So.
Yeah, I love this. And I think that we should do a part 2 to this, because there's so much to dive in here. But I think the big takeaways that I'm getting right now is, just to kind of summarize what we've talked about so far, is number one, make sure that you understand you're tracking ROI, like on lead generation. So that's the first point that I'm hoping everyone's taking away. You got to be able to track it. And then the next thing is give it enough time, depending on whether it's top of the funnel, middle of the funnel, bottom of the funnel. And if you don't know what type of lead you're purchasing, it's your responsibility to learn that and figure that out. Like, okay, ask the person, is this a long-term nurture lead, or is this a lead that, what's the average closing cycle on your leads? What percentage conversion should I expect? Ask those questions. And then the third thing I got is, what I got when I was listening to Brian is really figure out what your cost is per agent, so you know if you're spending enough on lead generation or too much as you're bringing in agents. Anything else that maybe I missed in the summary here?
I think that was basically, that was kind of where we were going with all that. And, it really comes down to the very first thing the very first word I wrote down. Sometimes I just write words down so I come back to it, is we've got to track our numbers. And at the end of the day, the majority of team leaders didn't start out as business owners. And what I mean by that, they were really good agents, and they said, you know what? I don't want to be a single agent for the rest of my life. I don't want to go join somebody else's team. I'm going to start my own team. By the way, great idea. The question is, are you running your team like a business, or are you running your team with hopes and prayers? Like, there's no way to make the proper adjustments if you don't have the proper data. And I can tell you, you and I do masterminds all the time with different people. This is the number one thing I see that people are uninterested in doing. And it's business 101, guys. Like, you don't need an MBA to sit down and track the amount of money you spent versus the amount of money you made.
Yeah. If you, a lot, I like that, because, Brian and I called, our coaching platform Grow CEO. We did it for a reason, because we wanted to help people think about operating as a CEO. So my question to you as a team leader, as the CEO, is how long would you be employed as a CEO working for another company if you weren't tracking your numbers, right? Like, how long?
Yeah, I not very long. As long as you can get away until you figured it out. Because that was basically, as soon as they figured it out, they'd be like, you need to get out the door. Because the CEO is the captain of the ship. How can you make decisions as the captain without any information? Yeah,
and I think that, this is a really, really important conversation, because I wish there was a way to calculate how much money has been lost and how much time and aggravation and frustration and lack of growth has been lost if you took all of the team leaders that have this problem that we're talking about right now. It's got to be in the hundreds of millions of dollars that have been lost because people have just not been taught properly how to think like a CEO, or just, maybe they're aware that they should be doing it, but like, there's not a conviction there because they haven't been taught or shown examples of how devastating it can be, right? When it's not. And I mean, you and I have seen a lot of P&Ls. I know you've seen a ton of profit and loss statements for the clients that you coach one-on-one. Mm-hmm. And you can tell, I don't know, I don't want to speak for you, but you can tell really quick, and see where the problems are and how much money they're losing or how much money they could be making just by making a few adjustments with how they're tracking their numbers and how they're managing their lead generation. And so I just want anyone listening, whether you're listening to this live stream or afterwards or on our podcast, I just really want you to really just reflect and ask yourself on a scale of 1 to 10, how good of a job am I doing, tracking my lead generation, tracking the ROI, looking at the metrics and making sure that I'm getting the right ROI and managing this process to make sure my team are working the right leads. And I think we'll probably talk more about that next week. Some of the best practices to make sure that we're working together with our team to maximize the ROI on the leads that we're paying for and the leads in our database. I think that'll be a great conversation for next week. And we try to keep this rate to 20-25 minutes. And so if you're currently not following Brian Curtis, if they probably go to Facebook and check you out, that'd be the best thing to do is Brian Curtis. Just type in your name, will pop up.
Good. I hope I'm not trying to be a secret agent out there. So hopefully we can find it.
So definitely stay in touch with, follow his page. He's got some awesome things going on. We're also going to drop a link in here. So if you want to learn more about, the Grow CEO Mastermind group that we have or one-on-one coaching that Brian offers through our program, I'm going to pop in a link in the comments, and I highly recommend you check it out because Brian, there's a lot of really, really successful teams that Brian has coached one-on-one, and it's phenomenal to see the results that have come out of it. So with that, Brian, anything you want to leave the group with before we wrap up here today?
I would just say go and look at your business and be willing to do the thing that makes most real estate agents uncomfortable, and that's do the math. And if you don't know how to do the math, get with somebody who can help you do the math, because at the end of the day, real estate's fun. We help a lot of people and all that's great, but most of us are doing it so that our kids can go to college, so our families can retire, and we can have a good life. And I love helping people. It's my number one thing that I love to do. Zig Ziglar says, the more people you can help get what you want, the more likely you are to get what you want. That being said, you still have to do some of those things. Here's the number one rule that team leaders / real estate agents need to get. There are going to be things every single day that you're going to have to do that you don't love so that you can be successful, so that you can go out and spend the majority of your time doing the things that you love.
I'm glad you said that, because one of the things that happens with us is the team leaders hate it at first, but then once they get used to doing it, they don't know how to live without tracking, without the metrics. They feel naked if they don't have them. So it's just kind of like any habit, right? So I'm glad you mentioned that. Be willing to develop the habit, and then you won't know how to function without it in a good way, and your business will go to your business will go to a whole nother level. So we're gonna go live again next Wednesday at 12 o'clock Eastern Standard Time. This will also get posted in our podcast for all our listeners, and we appreciate your support. If you found this content helpful in any way, help us get the word out there, because we're really on a mission to help top producers and team leaders get to 7 figures and beyond. That's kind of what Brian's and ours, when we come together, we've united in that mission. So if you're really interested in, you can see yourself going to that next step. Stay tuned every Wednesday, and you're going to hear some awesome content. Brian, thanks for joining us, and we'll see you guys soon. Have a good day, everybody.